Hi, this is Chantal Noordeloos. I'm the author of the first book in the Lucifer Fall series called Angel Manor, and I will be reading you the prologue. Summer solstice, 1822. The blood trickled over the sagging breasts of the Mother Superior, staining her white skin crimson. The limp body of the 5-year-old boy hung slack in her arms. Reverend Mother, Sister Agatha's voice trembled. There must be some kinder way to kill the child. One not so inhumane? The nun looked up at her, her wrinkled face a canvas of red splatter, framing pale blue eyes which almost seemed to glow. The older woman straightened herself, letting the child drop with a wet smack, her wrinkled hand still wrapped around one of his arms, as the lower part of his body hung slack against her ankle. He looked like a limp doll, a toy she hadn't quite finished playing with. The nun's lips curled into a sneer, and her eyes narrowed. Sister Agatha, I know you are new to the order, but when you took your holy vows, you were instructed in the rules of the convent. This is your first solstice, and I understand that our methods may seem harsh to a newcomer, but we have a sacred duty. The woman dropped the arm and stepped over the young boy. Trails of blood trickled down her torso and across her legs, covering them in a slick red layer. Do you think I enjoy this? Yes, Sister Agatha wanted to scream. You've lived too long in this world of torment and murder. It has turned you into a monster. No, Reverend Mother. Agatha lowered her eyes, focusing on the blood pooling around the young boy's body. I know this isn't easy, sister. Calloused hands grabbed her cheek and her chin, forcing her to look into those terrible eyes. But we follow God's will. If we don't, the consequences will be disastrous. And for more than just a handful of unwanted children, no one cares for these wretched souls. I do, Sister Agatha thought, but she held her tongue. The screams of the dying children reverberated through the stone convent. Her eyes pleaded with Mother Superior. Have you considered the ritual I found? It would save so many of them. There would be no need for all this bloodshed. You would ask us to make such a great personal sacrifice for a ritual that might not work? The older woman shook her head, a condescending smile playing on her wrinkled lips. Sister Agatha, we've discussed this. There's only one way to ensure the safety of the seal. We cannot take any risks. This is not a game. The blood-stained hand moved down Sister Agatha's neck, passing over her shoulder, and gripped her bare arm, squeezing the flesh. We thought you were ready for this when you made your vows. You are no stranger to death. You were especially chosen for the blood already on your hands. Agatha's voice was barely above a whimper. I am indeed no stranger to blood and death, but I killed sick and deformed children, not healthy ones. I've never seen such gratuitous torment as I have here. Her eyes darted around the chapel to the naked figures of the other sisters. The sound of lashes drew her eyes to the stout figure of Sister Helene, who cracked a long bullwhip across the backs of a trio of bound children, each no older than 7. Their fragile skin tore as a leather thong licked across their flesh, spilling crimson tears. In the center of the chapel hung a 12-year-old boy, suspended upside down from black robes. The blade of a large rust-covered saw sliced through the flesh of his groin, a red waterfall gushing out from the wound, spraying across his chest and face. The agonized screams of the boy sounded unworldly, every morbid vibrato note hammering against Agatha's mind. A wave of nausea hit the back of her throat. The bodies of the fallen children lay scattered around the room, their blood coagulated in a pool covering over half the chapel floor. The whimpers coming from the survivors were little more than a pitiful hum. Agatha had thought her mission noble when she first joined the order, but this suffering overwhelmed her with nausea and regret. There was a better way than this needless waste of young life. Agatha was sure of it. We could save thousands of lives by sacrificing just a few. Sister Anne and I have studied the text and we're pretty confident we can do it. Tonight even, we've made all the preparations just in case you change your mind. The sacrifice required is relatively small compared to... The Reverend Mother's hand lashed out, connecting with Agatha's cheek with a loud crack. Pain spread out in tiny pinpricks across her face. Shocked, she clutched her face and looked at Mother Superior. Enough of this! Spittle flew from the Reverend Mother's lips. Your rituals are pagan. We serve our Lord here as we were instructed. You had best mind the blasphemous words you uttered here, Sister Agatha. The Lord does not look kindly upon heathens. The older woman's face relaxed slightly, and her expression turned from angry to stern. We will never speak of this again. Now go and make the sacrifices required of us. The old woman shoved her forward with a force that belied her frail appearance. Agatha slipped on a puddle of blood, her legs sprawling under her like an awkward doze. She fell to the ground, her wrists and elbows hitting the floor hard. Pain shot up her arms, her naked body shivering on the cold stones. She looked up to see Mother Superior walk away, leaving bloody footsteps in her wake. Agatha's eyes followed her until she passed the body of little Margaret. The young girl lay with her neck twisted in an impossible angle, eyes staring lifelessly at the horror in the chapel. I must find Anne. Sister Agatha scrambled to her feet, her hands and legs stained with the cold, sticky blood. She glanced at the carnage around her, and then she ran, the soles of her feet slapping against the stone, the impact rattling her teeth. She ran across the chapel, through the narrow passages and across the great cloister. The sister felt the cold eyes of the 12 stone angels lining the walls of the large open area. The sister felt the cold eyes of the 12 stone angels lining the walls of the open area look down on her. Slowing her pace, she glanced up at the imposing statues. Even knowing stone couldn't judge her, she found it difficult not to imagine God peering down through those blank eyes. A shudder ran through her spine, and she picked up her pace, not stopping until she reached the library. Anne! Her voice reverberated off the high walls, echoing parts of her words back at her. Sister Anne! The voice came from behind her. Sister Agatha? Agatha turned to face her ally. Anne was dressed in a long white chemise, her red hair loose and flowing like liquid fire over her shoulders. Anne ran down the stairs, the white nightgown fluttering around her. Did you inform the Reverend Mother that we were ready to perform the ritual? I tried. Agatha bit her lips, tasting the salt of her own sweat. She wouldn't listen to me. She thinks the ritual is too pagan, and it would be an insult to God. And she believes that the risk is too great. Anne's face fell, and she shook her head. I cannot believe the sacrifice we are making during the solstice and the equinox is God's will. It would be foolish not to at least try. Think of all the lives we could save. I don't understand why... The thought formed in Agatha's mind. Can we perform the ritual ourselves? What? Can we perform the ritual ourselves without the help of the order? Well, we could, but the sacrifice would be much greater. The sisters might share the children's fate, And we still need a willing sacrifice along with the victims. The light of the fading sun streamed through the stained glass window, illuminating the picture of an angel. His wings were spread, and he covered his face with an expression of shame. The light danced off Agatha's blonde locks as she straightened herself. I will be the willing sacrifice. Anne gasped, putting her delicate fingers in front of her mouth. But it was your task to act as the guardian, to ensure the spell stays in place, to teach future generations how to keep the seal from breaking. That task will be yours, and no one else. There is no one else. And if we want this bloodshed to stop, if we want these to be the last victims, then we have no other choice. Faint screams echoed through the convent. The candles flickered as an unfelt wind blew past them, casting dark, elongated shadows across the bookshelves. Anne sighed. I agree. As you said, there is no other choice. Very well, I will take on the task of guardianship. But if this doesn't work, Sister Anne clutched her chemise tightly around her neck and shuddered at the thought. Then you must continue what the Order of Angels started, Anne. You must create a new order. I don't know if I can, not on my own. Do you have any other choice? Anne's shoulders sagged. That's what it all boils down to, isn't it? Choice. The two women stared at each other, the tension apparent from their young faces, until a nearby scream broke their eye contact. Anne looked up for the last hints of sunlight glimmering through the window. We must act quickly. The sun is setting. I will need the last of the daylight to perform the ritual. We need the power of the solstice. What must I do? Sister Agatha's voice and body trembled. She had seen plenty of death, but facing her own was different. Her mortality weighed heavy on her, but the thought of those children's faces was too much for her to bear. Sister Anne grabbed a book that lay open on one of the rough oak tables, the thin paper threatening to fall apart in her hands. I need you to draw this symbol on the floor. Sister Anne's finger pressed so hard on the page that the tip went wide. It needs to be large enough for you to lie in the middle. She handed the book to Agatha, who was surprised by the weight of it. The leather felt smooth in her hand, and the pages smelt like time long past and a little of mildew. Sister Agatha stared at the symbol. To her relief, it was no more complicated than a circle with a triangle inside. I think that shouldn't be too hard a task. As long as you don't expect the circle to be perfectly round, what do I draw with? She looked over the top of the book, and the expression on the other woman's face made her heart sink. What? You need to draw it in the blood of a virgin. All the children are virgins, Agatha thought about the bodies in the chapel. Taking the blood of the dead children isn't enough, Sister Agatha. That won't make it a sacrifice. You must find a living victim for the blood circle. Otherwise, we will interfere with the magic of the spell. Agatha nodded, her face a mask of conviction, and turned on her heel. The slow, heavy drumbeat of determination pounded in her chest as she strode back towards the chapel. A movement caught her eye, and she turned to see Beth, the youngest of the children, slip past one of the stone angels. Beth was only 4 years old, and she was Sister Agatha's favorite. The girl was exceptionally smart for her age. Beth? Her voice quavered when she spoke, and the girl looked at her with big grey eyes from under blood-matted black curls, her bottom lip trembling. Come here, child. Sister Agatha squatted and held her arms open. The girl's face was filled with doubt, but after a few seconds she ran into Agatha's bare arms. The small limbs wrapped around her, the tiny face nestled in the crook of her neck, and Agatha felt how cold the child's skin was. She slid her hand over the girl's shoulder and tangled her fingers in the mass of curls at the back of her head. Her slender fingers closed around the tuft of hair, and she yanked the child away from her. Her mouth was a thin line, her eyes hard. Sister Agatha scrambled to her feet, her fingers still clinging to the little girl's hair. She wanted to say something comforting, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she pulled Beth along, while the angels looked down on her. Beth struggled, but the child's strength was no match for hers, and the nun could tell that the little girl was exhausted. It has been a long day. Agatha stopped at the large wooden doors, throwing the girl to the ground before them with more force than she intended. A sense of urgency coursed through her body as she fumbled with the latch, and after a brief struggle she managed to open the door. The scent of fresh grass, intermingled with the faint smell of wildflowers, greeted her, and Sister Agatha felt the last lingering warmth of the setting summer sun on her naked body. She beckoned for the child to come closer. Beth! Her words were no more than an urgent hiss, and she pointed her finger at the floor next to her. Beth, I don't have time for this. Come here! The girl blinked at her and crawled closer. Sister Agatha grabbed the child again and hoisted her to her feet. I'm afraid. The girl's voice was sharp with panic. As well you should be. I need you to do something, Beth. I need you to run away, far away from here. Don't look back. Don't tell anyone what you have seen here or where you came from. Can you do that, Beth? The little girl nodded, tears pouring down her face as she wiped the snot from her nose with the back of her hand. The only garment she had on was an off-white shift, but at least she wasn't naked like most of the other children. Don't send people to the convent, Beth. This is a bad place. You have to keep our secret. The girl nodded again. Her face filled with hesitation, and after a small pause, she pressed her body against Agatha's in a brief hug. Go now! The nun watched the little girl run from the convent towards the valley that the locals called Lucifer Falls. Then, as quickly as she could, she closed the door and replaced the latch. An overwhelming sob rose in her throat. Sister Agatha walked away from the door, but fell to her knees only a few steps further. She looked at the stone angel standing only a few feet away, its fingers pointing if it were condemning her actions. Forgive me, Lord, I had to save one. Tears ran past her cheeks and trickled in lukewarm paths down her neck. Just one. The rays of the sun slowly retreated across the floor, and she remembered Sister Agatha's warning that time was running short. Without any further hesitation, she ran to the kitchen and found what she needed. Her hand wrapped around the handle of a large knife, and she turned to run again. Sister Agatha! Agatha froze, her shoulders tense as she looked up into the face of Mother Superior. The nun's voice was harsh and demanding. Agatha hid the knife behind her back. Why are you here? I instructed you to do your sacred duty. The old woman took a few steps forward, her aging blue-veined breasts moving like soft, flabby pendulums. A cat o' nine tails, studded with metal barbs, hung next to her leg, the end of the handle tapping against the folds of skin. There was madness in the old crone's eyes, bloodlust. Agatha realized that Mother Superior would not take her insubordination lightly, and she suddenly understood why the older woman had followed her into the kitchen. Reverend Mother! Her hands clutched the knife behind her back tighter, her eyes fixed on the pale woman's blue ones. She was aware of the gentle swaying motion of the whip. I was just on my way. You don't understand, do you? You don't grasp the importance of what we do here. The whip dragged across the floor, the metal spikes scraping against the stone. We suffer in our own way. Sister Agatha, we are the angels sent by God Almighty to keep the world safe. We torment these children out of love. One day you will understand this, but today you must be punished for your heresy. Agatha straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Very well. If that's what God demands of me, I shall take my punishment. She inhaled and held her breath as she walked towards the graying nun. Her hand moved from her back to her side, still hiding the knife from view. Her arms stiff with tension. The elder woman's blood-streaked face stayed on her, but Sister Agatha didn't think she'd spotted any suspicion in the Reverend Mother's eyes. The other woman's arm twitched, and the whip made another rustling sound. Agatha waited until she was close enough, then lowered her head in a false sign of submission. The older nun took a step aside, allowing her to pass by on the way out of the kitchen, but instead of walking up to the door, Agatha turned and slid the knife into Mother Superior's kidney. The woman let out a wet gasp and toppled forward. The whip clattered to the ground. Agatha was aware of its existence, as if it was a poisonous snake that could still be a threat. With one foot she tried to kick it away, but the barbs caught and tore her skin. She pulled the knife free with one swift motion, flipped Mother Superior around, clutched her neck, pressing the sharp edge of the blade against the folds of skin under her chin. Her body was tough and hot, blood and sweat making the Reverend Mother slippery. The wound must have taken the old woman by surprise, because she barely struggled as Agatha pushed her towards the kitchen doors. The Reverend Mother's body pushed against Agatha's breast, twitching and gurgling as they walked. I've decided I will try this ritual after all, Reverend Mother. Agatha's voice was a low hiss, and a guilty pleasure in feeling the old woman's tremble filled her mind. I need the blood of a virgin. Initially I thought I would have to use one of the children, but then I saw you. The Mother Superior moaned and struggled to get loose, but Agatha pressed the knife harder against her neck, and the woman stopped moving. She pushed the reluctant figure towards the library. God will punish you for this. Defeat resonated in the older woman's voice, and Agatha realized that the Mother Superior was a coward. She appeared strong and merciless in the face of those who were weaker, as Agatha herself had been. But fear ruled this woman as much as it did the children. What are you doing? Sister Anne stood in the center of the library, her long rosy face a mask of incomprehension. I thought the Mother Superior didn't agree with our ritual, and yet you bring her... The words died on her pale lips when her eyes moved down Agatha's face to the way her arm was wrapped around the older nun's throat, then further still to the cut in the abdomen from which blood poured in languid trickles. You said we needed the blood of a virgin. Agatha moved the knife against the puffy skin right beneath the Reverend Mother's eye. I would stake my life on it that the Mother has never felt the pleasure of a man between her thighs. The metal point pierced her skin and a red drop welled from the wound. Agatha met Sister Anne's eyes, and for a moment the world appeared to stand still. Sister Anne, please. Their gnarled hands reached up towards the younger woman. Help me stop this insanity. You, of all people, must know why it's so important. We do what we do. You are one of us. The expression on Sister Anne's face changed from shock to determination. Her eyes hard and filled with hate. She'll do. The sister finally agreed, and she turned back to her ritual. Just hurry. Agatha brought the knife to the soft, flabby wattle beneath the Mother Superior's chin and drew the sharp end of the blade across it with all her strength. The flesh gave way to the pressure. Metal sliced through skin, muscle and larynx. Hot, sticky blood gushed over Agatha's arm, and she took a step back, releasing her victim. The mother clutched her neck and fell to the ground with a wet, meaty thud. A rattle escaped from her creased lips, and her eyes rolled up in her head. Her body twitched, and blood pooled around the dying woman as Agatha grabbed her ankles. The Mother Superior Superior didn't struggle as the younger nun dragged her around the library floor, her gushing blood creating a smeared circle on the stones, and by the time the triangle was halfway done, she had stopped twitching altogether. The final markings on the sign were fainter, but the symbol was complete. Agatha discarded the body to one side. It's not perfect. She eyed her handiwork and tapped her blood-covered hand to her chin. It will have to do, Anne said, and she pointed towards the triangle. Now it's your sacrifice I'll be needing. Hurry, the sun is almost set. This won't work in moonlight. Agatha nodded, not giving herself time to think about her imminent death. The floor kissed her skin with icy cold stone, and Agatha couldn't stop shivering. Are you prepared? Anne loomed over her and lit a candle, dripping hot wax on her face. Agatha flinched, but fought the urge to protect herself, allowing the hot drops to slide down her cheeks in a scalding path. I'm ready. I'm not quite sure what the side effect of this spell will be. It's dark magic. You might suffer. Anne's eyes shone with guilt. I told you, I'm prepared. Anne nodded and took a deep breath, her chest swelling in her chemise, pressing the lightly freckled skin to the white fabric. In order to activate the spell, I have to crack the seal. What? No! You never told me! You can't! Agatha sat up, but a bare foot pushed her back in place. It's the only way to keep the dead bound to this place. It's the only way to make their suffering eternal. But if you do it wrong, you may break the seal completely. A flash of irritation flickered across Anne's face. Then I must not do it wrong. Sister Anne held the tome that Agatha had copied the symbol from, her eyes hazy with concentration, and she began to read. Nunc me mano fati facio, astrum et infernum abdicado, meus spiritus Dio aeternium sins pes an redemptum sorbo, finalaman hoistam mundo numero. The ground shuddered, and the convent creaked. Loud, ominous echoes reverberated off the grey walls, and the shelves shook, spilling books across the floor like broken butterflies. Dust sprayed from the cracks between the bricks as if the walls were bleeding dried mortar. Sister Anne repeated the words, and this time Agatha felt the stone floor shift and crack. The blood of the symbol flared up, forcing Sister Anne to take a step back and leave the circle. The light was so bright that it looked as if the blood were made of liquid sunshine. At that moment, the last of the actual sunlight faded from the windows. The stench of sulphur wafted through the air, turning Agatha's stomach, and the sound of glass shattering echoed throughout the library. The cracks in the floor grew longer and deeper. The thick black smoke oozed up from underneath and crept across the floor, avoiding the blood circle. Agatha raised her head. There was a movement within the smoke, as if something was alive inside it. The blackness moved towards the chanting nun, slithering up her pale limbs and under her long white chemise. The young nun screamed and dropped the book, which slid inside the circle of blood with a whoosh. Agatha saw the white of Anne's nightgown turn crimson, and the shadow poured out of her collar, turning it into a shape of a broad claw, tipped with sharp, ethereal talons. It forced its way into the young nun's screaming mouth and gripped her jaw, pulling. Agatha heard the sickening snap and crunch as the lower half of Sister Anne's face was torn loose. Agatha crawled to the edge of the blood circle, but noticed just in time that the shadows stayed away of the circle's light. She could see them clearer now, translucent black creatures with long arms and big heads. Their skulls were oblong, with beady white eyes, and black teeth protruded from their hideous maws. Short torsos ended in smoky trails rather than legs, and the creatures used their sharp claws to pull themselves forward with incredible speed. Their movements made the convent tremble again. Stones fell from the ceiling and shattered on the hard floor. This is what the spell looks like. We've conjured monsters. Tentatively, Agatha stretched out her hand and touched the light with trembling fingers. It felt warm. A pleasurable heat spread between her thighs, and Agatha moaned. Outside of the circle, Anne fell to the ground as more of the shadows rushed towards her, ripping the skin from her carcass. The creature swarmed over her body, feasting, tearing the flesh to ribbons with needle-sharp teeth and claws until nothing but bone, covered in shreds of bloody tissue, remained. They moved away from Sister Anne and scurried towards the chapel in search of more fresh meat. Agatha sat in the center of the illuminated circle, one hand covering her open mouth, and she fought the tears as she looked at the bloody remains of her friend. The screams in the convent intensified as the voices of the sisters of the Order of Angels joined those of the children. "What have we done?" Agatha sobbed and wrapped her arms around her knees. "Sister Agatha!" The voice was soft and otherworldly, but loud enough to cause the young nun to look up. A ghostly figure rose from the dead body, transparent but shaped like a human being. "Sister Anne?" Agatha's voice shook. "Is that you?" Her sanity was on the verge of shattering like glass, and the young nun stifled a sob. "I became the sacrifice, Agatha. I'm part of this place now. It is your task to finish the spell. The others will fall too, as I did. You must dispel the magic, or not let its monsters reach beyond the sacred ground. Our souls will feed the Master, who sleeps for eternity, and the seal should be safe. You will be the watcher of the seal." "It was I who should have died." "No, you were meant to live." "I don't know if I can finish the spell." "You can, and you must. If you don't, the monsters will be free." On her hands and knees, Agatha crawled towards the book. She pulled the leather-bound volume towards her. The pages were unfolded and cracked, but they appeared to be otherwise unharmed. "What am I looking for?" Anne's spirit closed her eyes, and the pages started to flutter by themselves. Agatha watched, holding her breath, until the pages settled. A salty taste flooded in her mouth as her teeth clamped down on her tongue. The book stopped moving, and the text on the page glowed. Agatha read the first words out loud, but the ghostly image of Sister Anne put a finger to her lips. "Not yet. They aren't done yet. The sacrifice needs to be complete. Otherwise, this will have been all for nothing." The spirit cocked her head, listening to the distant wailing. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness, while Agatha sat frozen to the spot, her the muscles in her limbs burning with fatigue, but she didn't dare move. Finally, the screams died down, and Sister Agatha nodded. "Now." "My Latin, it's not—" Something overtook her senses, and the words flowed from her lip. She called upon an ancient primal force and commanded it to pull the shadow creatures back through the cracks from which they escaped. The monsters screamed with bloodlust and rage. Their smoky talons tore deep scratches into the grey stone. An unseen fury compelled the monsters through the cracks, and then suddenly the convent was silent. Agatha clutched her chest and panted. Her body drenched in sweat and blood, she shivered with cold. Warm liquid poured down her lips. Her fingertips touched her nose and found blood. "You are now bonded to this place by blood. It is your duty to keep the spirits within." The voice of Sister Anne surrounded her. Behind her, dozens of white figures stepped into the library. Anne recognized most of the figures. Some were the naked sisters of her orders, others the children who had died in the convent that night. But she saw different spirits too, spirits of old nuns who had died years ago, and children Agatha had never seen before. There were men amongst them, and Agatha wondered who they might have been. Their translucent essence hummed slightly, and the young nun could feel their anger, fear, and frustration pulsate through the air. What's happening? Agatha looked around the many souls. Why do I feel like this? These souls are tormented, Sister Agatha. Theirs is an eternal suffering. The spell demands it. You are their guardian. Can these spirits harm the living? Sister Anne looked at her with soulful eyes, and Agatha knew that her task would be greater than she ever imagined. May God help us all. That was it.